Afternoon. Got a call about a suspicious male out here, possibly armed. You mind telling me what that stick is?
It's a cane. I'm blind and I'm waiting for the bus.
Looks like a weapon to me.
It's what helps me find the sidewalk so I don't walk into traffic.
You don't look blind. You look right at me when I spoke.
I'm blind, not deaf. I can still hear where you are.
Officer Brian Matthew, badge number 5823 of the Riverside Police Department, saw a black man waiting at a bus stop with a white cane and immediately assumed crime instead of disability. He demanded Elijah hand over the weapon, and when Elijah said, "It's not a weapon, it's a mobility cane. I need it to walk safely," Matthew shouted, "I'll decide what it is," and ripped it from his hands. Matthew then removed Elijah's protective glasses, arrested him for possession of a weapon and providing false information, and forced a blind man into a patrol car while he stumbled without his cane. What Matthew didn't know was that Elijah Turner had been blind since childhood, was known throughout the community as a disability rights leader, that security cameras and witness videos captured the entire incident in HD, and that his assumption that a black man was faking blindness would cost him his badge and result in a $9.2 million federal judgment. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. If you believe assumptions based on skin color can destroy innocent lives and must be exposed, then make sure you like this video and subscribe. Elijah Turner had been blind since the age of 4, when a childhood illness destroyed his optic nerves and left him in permanent darkness. Now, at 47 years old, he had spent 43 years navigating a world designed for sighted people, and he had become extraordinarily good at it. He worked as a counselor at the Veterans Disability Resource Center, helping other disabled veterans adapt to life with their injuries. He served on the city's ADA Compliance Board, advising local government on accessibility issues. He taught mobility classes twice a week, showing newly blind individuals how to use white canes to navigate safely. His life was full, productive, and independent, built on decades of hard work and the tools that made independence possible. The most important of those tools was his white cane, a collapsible mobility aid with red reflective bands that he carried everywhere he went. On this Tuesday afternoon in late September, Elijah sat on the bench to the Riverside Avenue bus stop, his cane resting across his lap, waiting for the number 7 bus that would take him home after a long day at the resource center. He wore dark protective glasses to shield his sensitive eyes from sunlight, and he had his work bag beside him containing files, his laptop, and the materials he needed for tomorrow's mobility class. The bus stop was familiar territory. He had used this same stop 5 days a week for the past 6 years, sitting on this same bench, taking the same route home. Other regular commuters knew him by sight, and the bus drivers knew to announce their route number when they pulled up so Elijah would know which bus had arrived. It was 5:20 in the afternoon, and the bus stop was moderately busy with people finishing their workday. Elijah sat quietly, listening to an audiobook through one earbud while keeping the other ear free to monitor his surroundings. He heard footsteps, car engines, conversations, the normal sounds of a city bus stop during rush hour. What he didn't hear, because it came from a patrol car that approached with no siren, was Officer Brian Matthew pulling into the bus stop area and parking at the curb. Matthew had been with the Riverside Police Department for 8 years, and during that time he had accumulated 17 civilian complaints in his personnel file. 8 of those complaints came from disabled individuals who accused him of harassment, disbelief, or excessive force. 3 specifically involved blind people who said Matthew had questioned whether they were really blind, had taken their canes, or had accused them of using their disability as an excuse for suspicious behavior. Internal Affairs had reviewed Matthew's record twice and found patterns of concern, but he had never faced serious discipline. His supervisors considered him aggressive but effective, the kind of officer who didn't hesitate to make stops that other officers might avoid. Earlier that afternoon, dispatch had received a call from someone reporting a suspicious black male with some kind of weapon or stick at the Riverside Avenue bus stop. The caller hadn't stayed on the line long enough to provide details, and the description was vague at best. When the call came over Matthew's radio, he was 2 blocks away and decided to respond. He pulled up to the bus stop, scanned the area, and his eyes locked immediately on Elijah sitting on the bench with the white cane across his lap. Matthew saw a black man holding a stick, and his mind made an instant connection to the weapons call. The fact that the cane had red reflective bands, that it was clearly a mobility aid, that Elijah was wearing dark glasses and sitting calmly, none of those details registered as important. Matthew saw what his biases told him to see, a potential threat that needed to be confronted. He stepped out of his patrol car and walked directly toward the bench, his hand already moving toward his duty belt in a gesture of authority and readiness. Elijah heard the heavy footsteps approaching but didn't react because people walked past the bus stop constantly. It wasn't until Matthew stopped directly in front of him and spoke that Elijah realized the footsteps had been meant for him. "Hey, you there. What are you doing?" Elijah turned his head toward the voice, confusion crossing his face. The tone was aggressive, demanding, nothing like the normal interactions he had had with people at the bus stop. "Me? Are you talking to me?" "I got a call about a suspicious black male with a dangerous weapon," Matthew said, his voice loud enough that other people at the bus stop turned to look. "That's you. What's that weapon you're holding?" Elijah's confusion deepened, but he kept his voice calm and patient, the same tone he used when explaining things to new clients at the resource center. "This? I'm blind. This is my walking stick. It's a cane for the blind." "Shut up! You're lying," Matthew snapped, his voice rising with irritation. "You can clearly see. You looked right at me when I walked up." Elijah felt a familiar sinking feeling in his stomach, the recognition that this situation was going wrong in a way he had experienced before, but never this aggressively. "I turned toward your voice, sir. I'm blind, not deaf. I can't see you. I'm completely blind. And this is a standard white cane." Matthew stepped closer and Elijah could hear the shuffle of his boots, could sense the proximity of someone invading his personal space. "I don't buy it. You're probably casing this place, maybe waiting for your friends so you can rob someone. Or rob somewhere together." "Sir, I'm just waiting for the bus," Elijah said, and his voice carried a note of worry now because he recognized the dangerous assumptions being made. He had counseled enough veterans with PTSD and trauma to know when a situation was escalating beyond reason. "Sure you are," Matthew said, and his hand reached out toward the cane. "Hand over that weapon." Elijah instinctively pulled the cane closer to his body, the protective gesture of someone who knew how essential the tool was to his safety. "It's not a weapon. It's a mobility cane. I need it to walk safely." "I'll decide what it is," Matthew said, and his hand closed around the cane. Around them, other people at the bus stop had stopped their conversations and were watching the confrontation. A woman in her 30s pulled out her phone and started recording. A man in a business suit moved closer, concern clear on his face. The bus stop's security camera mounted on the shelter's roof continued its constant recording, capturing every word and gesture in high definition. Elijah felt the tug on his cane and held on, not aggressively but firmly, trying to explain one more time. "Officer, please, I need this. I can't see. I can't walk safely without my cane. I use it to detect obstacles, curbs, steps. Please don't take it." Matthew yanked hard, and the cane pulled free from Elijah's grip. Without it, Elijah immediately felt disoriented, his primary tool for navigating the world suddenly gone. He reached out instinctively, trying to orient himself, his hand searching for the familiar weight and balance of the cane. "Stop resisting," Matthew barked, interpreting Elijah's reaching hands as aggression rather than the desperate attempt of a blind man to find his bearings. "I'm not resisting," Elijah said, his voice strained now with genuine fear. "I'm blind. I can't see. Please give me back my cane." Matthew ignored him and reached for Elijah's face, grabbing the dark protective glasses. "And take off those glasses. Let me see your eyes." "I need these," Elijah said, trying to turn his head away. "My eyes are sensitive to light. Please don't." Matthew ripped the glasses off Elijah's face, and the sudden exposure to afternoon sunlight caused Elijah to squint and turn away. His eyes, damaged since childhood, didn't focus on anything. They moved independently, searching for a visual input that would never come. The telltale sign of someone with severe optic nerve damage. But Matthew didn't see disability. He saw what he wanted to see. "See? You're fine. You're faking. You're under arrest." Elijah heard the clink of metal and recognized the sound of handcuffs. "Under arrest for what? I haven't done anything." "Possession of a weapon. Resisting arrest. Providing false information to an officer," Matthew said, grabbing Elijah's arm and pulling it behind his back. The woman recording spoke up, her voice sharp with outrage. "He's blind. That's his cane. What are you doing?" "Stay back, or you'll be arrested for interference," Matthew shot back, without even looking at her. The man in the business suit stepped forward. "Officer, I take this bus every day. I know this man. His name is Elijah. He works at the VA center. He's blind. That's his mobility cane." Matthew ignored him and snapped the second handcuff onto Elijah's other wrist. Elijah stood there, handcuffed, without his cane, without his glasses, completely disoriented and unable to see anything around him. He could hear voices, could hear people protesting, could hear the officer radioing for backup, but he couldn't see where he was. Couldn't navigate. Couldn't even protect himself from stumbling into obstacles. "I can't see," Elijah said again, his voice breaking slightly. "I don't know where I am. Please, I need my cane." You'll get it back at the station, Matthew said, steering him roughly toward the patrol car. Elijah stumbled, unable to see the curb, and Matthew caught him with an irritated grunt. Watch your step. I can't watch anything, Elijah said quietly. I'm blind. But Officer Brian Matthew had already decided that was a lie, and nothing Elijah said would change his mind. The security camera recorded it all. The witness phones captured every moment. And in less than an hour, the video would begin spreading across social media, showing the world exactly what happened when a police officer refused to believe that a blind man was blind. Matthew guided Elijah toward the patrol car with one hand gripping his arm, treating him like any other suspect being led to custody. Elijah stumbled twice on the short walk from the bench to the curb because he couldn't see where he was stepping. Each time he lost his balance, Matthew tightened his grip and said, "Stop fighting me," even though Elijah wasn't fighting at all. He was simply a blind man trying to walk without the cane that normally told him where obstacles were. "I'm not fighting," Elijah said, his voice strained. "I can't see the ground. I don't know where to step." Matthew opened the back door of the patrol car and put his hand on the top of Elijah's head to push him down into the seat. Elijah bumped his shoulder against the door frame because he couldn't see the opening, and Matthew pushed harder. "Get in the car." Elijah sat down on the hard plastic seat, his hands still cuffed behind his back, completely disoriented. He had no idea which direction he was facing. Couldn't see the inside of the car. Couldn't tell if there was anything in front of him that he might hit if the car stopped suddenly. The door slammed shut, and he heard Matthew walk away. Through the closed window, Elijah could hear raised voices outside. The woman who had been recording was still there, and her voice carried clearly. "You just arrested a blind man. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was waiting for the bus." Matthew's voice came back sharp and dismissive. "Ma'am, I told you to stay back. This doesn't concern you." "I'm recording this," the woman said. "Everyone saw what you did. You took his cane and arrested him for being blind." "He was carrying a weapon and lying about his condition," Matthew said. "Now step back or you're going in the car with him." The man in the business suit spoke up again. "Officer, I'm telling you, that man works at the Veterans Disability Resource Center. He's a counselor. He teaches mobility classes for blind people. You made a mistake." "I didn't make a mistake," Matthew said, but there was an edge in his voice now. A defensiveness that suggested he was starting to feel uncertain. "I responded to a weapons call, and I found a subject matching the description." Another voice joined in, an older woman who had been waiting for the bus. "I've seen him here every day for years. He always has that cane. He's blind. Anyone can see that." Matthew walked back to his patrol car and got in the driver's seat, ending the conversation. He radioed dispatch. "This is Unit 47. I have one subject in custody en route to central booking. Weapons violation and false information." Dispatch responded with the standard acknowledgement, and Matthew pulled away from the curb. In the back seat, Elijah sat perfectly still, trying to orient himself by the sounds and movements of the car. He could hear traffic, could feel the turns, but nothing gave him a visual reference because there was no visual reference to be had. He had been blind for 43 years and had never felt more helpless than he did right now, sitting in the back of a police car without his cane and without his glasses. "Officer Matthew," Elijah said, keeping his voice calm and respectful, "I need you to understand something. I really am blind. I have medical documentation. I'm registered with the State Commission for the Blind. I can give you the names of people who can verify my condition. Please, just call someone before we get to the station." "You can explain all of that during booking," Matthew said, not turning around. "My cane is a medical device," Elijah continued. "Taking it from me is like taking a wheelchair from someone who can't walk. I need it to be safe. I need it to navigate. Please don't treat it as evidence. It's not a weapon." Matthew didn't respond. The silence stretched out for the rest of the drive, which took about 8 minutes. When they arrived at the police station, Matthew parked in the garage and came around to open the back door. Elijah heard the door handle click and tried to prepare himself for whatever came next. "Step out," Matthew ordered. Elijah moved carefully, sliding across the seat until his feet found the ground. He stood up slowly, unsure of the space around him, and Matthew grabbed his arm again. They walked through what sounded like a parking garage, then through a door that led into the station. Elijah could hear voices, footsteps, the echo of a large indoor space, but he couldn't see any of it. He was completely dependent on Matthew to guide him, and Matthew was treating him like a criminal instead of a blind man who needed assistance. They reached the booking area, and Matthew stopped. Elijah heard another voice, a deeper male voice that sounded older and carried authority. "What do we have here?" the voice asked. "Weapons violation," Matthew said. "Subject was at a bus stop with what appeared to be a weapon. Refused to cooperate. Claimed he was blind." Claimed? The other voice said, and there was a note of concern in it. What do you mean, claimed? He's faking it, Matthew said. I could see him looking around. He's lying about being blind. Elijah felt a small surge of hope because the other voice sounded skeptical of Matthew's explanation. He spoke up, addressing the new person. Sir, I'm not faking anything. I've been blind since I was 4 years old. I have medical records. I work at the Veterans Disability Resource Center. I was just waiting for my bus when Officer Matthew took my mobility cane and arrested me. There was a pause, and then the other voice said, Sergeant Williams? And you are? Elijah Turner, Elijah said. I need my cane back. I can't see. I can't navigate without it. Sergeant Williams stepped closer, and Elijah heard his footsteps circle around him. Officer Matthew, where is this weapon you're talking about? In my trunk, Matthew said, and that is some kind of stick. Go get it, Williams ordered, and his tone made clear it wasn't a suggestion. Matthew left, and Elijah stood there in handcuffs, unable to see the sergeant or anyone else in the room. He heard murmuring, heard other people moving around, heard the sounds of a busy police station operating around him, and he waited, hoping that someone would finally listen and understand that he was telling the truth. Matthew returned, carrying Elijah's white cane, and set it on the booking desk. Sergeant Williams picked it up and examined it closely, turning it in his hands. The cane was clearly marked with red reflective bands, had a rubber tip designed for tactile feedback, and bore a small engraved plate that read, Property of Elijah Turner. If found, please call the State Commission for the Blind, with a phone number below. Williams looked at Matthew with an expression that had shifted from skeptical to angry. This is a standard mobility cane for the blind. It has reflective safety bands and a registration number. What part of this looks like a weapon to you? Matthew's face flushed. He was holding it in a suspicious way. The call said a blackmail with a weapon. The call said a stick, Williams corrected, pulling up the dispatch record on his computer. And this is clearly a white cane, not a weapon. He turned to Elijah. Mr. Turner, I'm going to remove these handcuffs. I apologize for what's happened here. The metal restraints clicked open, and Elijah rubbed his wrists. Williams handed him the cane, and Elijah's hands closed around it with visible relief. He extended it immediately, tapping the floor to orient himself, using the familiar tool to build a mental map of the space around him. Where are my glasses? Elijah asked quietly. Williams looked at Matthew. You took his glasses? To verify he wasn't faking, Matthew said, but his voice had lost all its earlier confidence. Williams walked to Matthew's patrol car and retrieved the dark glasses from the front seat. When he returned and handed them to Elijah, the sergeant's jaw was tight with barely controlled anger. Elijah put the glasses on, and the relief on his face was immediate. His damaged eyes stopped trying to process the painful bright lights of the police station. Mr. Turner, Williams said carefully, can you tell me exactly what happened at the bus stop? Elijah recounted the entire encounter in precise detail. The aggressive approach, the demand to hand over the weapon, the refusal to believe he was blind, the accusations of casing the area for a robbery, the forceful removal of his cane and glasses, the arrest. As he spoke, Williams pulled up something on his computer and his expression grew darker. Officer Matthew, Williams said, his voice cold. Mr. Turner's name just came up in our database. Do you know why? Matthew shook his head. Because he's listed as a member of the city's ADA Compliance Board. He advises the mayor's office and the police department on disability accessibility issues. He's also a counselor at the Veterans Disability Resource Center. Williams turned the computer screen toward Matthew. He's been blind since childhood. It's documented in every city database we have. The color drained from Matthew's face. Williams wasn't finished. There's more. I just received an email from the chief's office. Apparently a video of your arrest has already gone viral. 3 million views in the last hour. The mayor's office is demanding an explanation for why one of our officers arrested a disability advocate and took his mobility cane. Elijah spoke quietly but with devastating precision. Officer Matthew, I've been blind for 43 years. I've used a white cane for 40 years. I teach other blind people how to use canes safely. I sit on the board that reviews police department compliance with disability laws. And today, you decided that none of that was real because you couldn't believe a black man was telling you the truth about his own body. He paused, letting the words settle. I've been stopped by police before. I've been questioned. I've had officers ask to see my identification. But I have never had an officer call me a liar, accuse me of faking a documented disability, take my medical device, and arrest me while I stood there unable to see where I was or what was happening to me. Williams pulled Matthew aside and spoke in a harsh whisper that Elijah could still hear. You arrested a blind man. You took his cane. You removed his protective glasses. You did it all on camera. And you did it to someone who literally advises this department on how not to do exactly what you just did. Matthew tried to respond. I didn't know. You didn't ask, Elijah interrupted, his voice cutting through the room. You saw a black man with a cane and assumed criminal. You heard me say I was blind and assumed liar. You had every opportunity to verify my condition, to look at the cane closely, to ask basic questions, to call the number engraved on my cane, to check city records. You did none of those things because you had already decided what you believed. Williams turned back to Matthew. You're suspended, effective immediately. Badge and service weapon on the desk. The chief wants to see you first thing tomorrow morning, and I guarantee that meeting will not go well for you. Matthew placed his badge and gun on the desk with shaking hands, his career visibly crumbling in real time. Elijah stood with his cane in hand and his glasses back on his face, and he delivered the final blow with cold, measured certainty. I will be filing a federal lawsuit. Americans with Disabilities Act violation, civil rights violation, assault, false arrest. And I will make sure every detail of what you did becomes part of the public record so that other disabled people know what happened when an officer decided their disability wasn't real. He tapped his cane once on the floor, oriented himself toward the exit, and walked out of the police station with more dignity than the officer who had arrested him would ever have again. Officer Brian Matthew was fired from the Riverside Police Department 3 weeks after the incident at the bus stop. The termination letter cited multiple violations including disability discrimination, failure to follow ADA protocols, unlawful seizure of medical equipment, false arrest, and conduct unbecoming an officer. Because he was terminated for cause after just 8 years of service, Matthew lost his pension, his health benefits, and any chance of working in law enforcement again. The video of him ripping a blind man's cane away had been viewed over 20 million times, and his face was now permanently associated with one of the most blatant cases of disability discrimination caught on camera. Elijah Turner filed his federal lawsuit 6 weeks after the arrest. The complaint was comprehensive and devastating. It detailed violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, civil rights violations under the 4th and 14th Amendments, assault and battery, false imprisonment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit named Officer Matthew personally and the Riverside Police Department, demanding $9.2 million in damages. Elijah's attorneys held a press conference where they played the bus stop security footage and the witness video side by side, showing multiple angles of Matthew ignoring obvious evidence of disability and forcibly taking a blind man's mobility aid. The city's legal team watched the footage and read the medical documentation proving Elijah had been blind since age 4. They reviewed Matthew's personnel file and found 8 previous complaints from disabled individuals, all describing similar patterns of disbelief and aggression. They saw that Matthew had received mandatory ADA training twice and had signed documents acknowledging he understood disability rights laws. Fighting the lawsuit became impossible. The evidence was overwhelming, the optics were terrible, and the plaintiff was a respected disability advocate who had literally helped write the accessibility guidelines that Matthew had violated. The city offered to settle for $2 million 3 months after the lawsuit was filed. Elijah's attorneys rejected it immediately. This isn't just about money. This is about a pattern of abuse against disabled people that your department ignored for years. The case went to trial, and the jury heard testimony that left some of them visibly angry. Elijah described the disorientation and fear of being without his cane, unable to see where he was being taken or what was happening around him. Medical experts explained that his type of blindness was impossible to fake, and that white canes were protected medical devices under federal law. Other disabled individuals testified about their experiences with Matthew, describing a pattern of refusing to believe their disabilities were real. The jury deliberated for 5 hours and returned a verdict that sent shockwaves through law enforcement circles across the state. They found in favor of Elijah on every count and awarded the full $9.2 million, with $70 million designated as punitive damages to punish the egregious nature of the violation. The jury foreman read a statement saying, "The defendant's actions were not just wrong, they were cruel. Taking a mobility device from a blind person is assault, and doing it based on the assumption that he was lying about his disability adds a layer of discrimination that this community will not tolerate." Matthew filed for bankruptcy within weeks of the verdict, but disability discrimination judgments cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. The court ordered his wages garnished for life. At 39 years old, he was working overnight shifts, stocking shelves at a warehouse for $12 an hour, with a significant portion of each paycheck seized to pay a debt he would never fully satisfy. He had become locally known as the officer who didn't believe a blind man was blind. And that reputation followed him to every job interview, every background check, every attempt to rebuild any semblance of the life he had destroyed. The Riverside Police Department underwent a complete overhaul of its disability interaction policies. The police chief who had failed to address Matthew's pattern of complaints was forced to retire. New mandatory training was implemented requiring officers to accept and accommodate disabilities without question. A disability liaison position was created, staffed by advocates from the blind and disabled communities. Body camera policies were strengthened to ensure all interactions with disabled individuals were recorded and reviewed. 5 other officers with similar complaint patterns were pressured to resign before formal investigations could begin. Elijah used a portion of his settlement to establish the Disability Rights Documentation Project, which provided free cameras and legal support to disabled individuals who experienced discrimination. He continued his work at the Veterans Disability Resource Center and remained on the city's ADA board, now with significantly more influence and respect. He spoke at police academies across the country, often bringing his white cane and holding it up as he told his story. This is not a weapon. This is freedom. This is independence. This is how I navigate a world that wasn't built for me. And when you take it from someone, you're not protecting the community. You're attacking someone who's already fighting just to move through the world safely. 5 years after that September afternoon at the bus stop, Elijah was honored with a National Disability Advocacy Award. Brian Matthew was still working manual labor, still making payments on a judgment he would carry for the rest of his life. The video remained online, a permanent record of what happens when assumptions override evidence, and when officers refuse to believe disabled people about their own lived reality. The lesson was simple and unforgiving. Disabilities are not subject to belief or disbelief. They exist regardless of whether someone chooses to acknowledge them. And when authority figures decide they know better than disabled people about their own bodies, the consequences can be career-ending, financially devastating, and permanent. Real justice means believing people when they tell you who they are and what they need. Share this if you've ever had to prove your disability to someone who decided you are lying. What protections do you think disabled people need when dealing with law enforcement? Comment below. And if you believe taking someone's mobility aid is never justified, subscribe, because we're bringing you more stories where ableism met accountability and lost everything.